I think the question, and if I'm off, please remind me, but was more about the gesture of this one. We could talk about drapery too. So if I'm doing a gesture for this pose, here's my head, and I see this one, I would see this one going this way. So that'd be my thoracic spine. This would be my stretch from the front of the body through the abdomen down into the pelvis. This is my lumbar line, then pelvis, and then the weight shifted to the left leg. So I'd start to think about weight getting managed on this side, which means this is the side of the body that I want to work down into the leg through first. So here's femur. I didn't start with a proportion chart. We've been at this for a while and maybe haven't looked at that, so it'd be worth putting in. So from head to foot, if I haven't started with the whole heads and getting like the measurements out, what I'll do is just get a half. So head to pelvis, this distance has to match pelvis to foot. So this is pretty close, but this would be more of like the 8-head model. So you would know if you wanted to diminish it, you would just bring the leg up a half head, but nothing wrong with 8 heads. Lines to give a sense of the perspective, so leaning back, and then this comes out. So I think for gesture, one of the things to always remember no matter what is my lines never change. Like it's always this cervical, thoracic, stretch, lumbar, pelvis. The lengths never change for each one unless there's foreshortening. So I use this for every pose. Like this, I could make this a back view just by the context that I bring to it. So if I showed you the back of the head, the jaw over here, and maybe like a scapula shape, now that's the back, right? Or if I showed you, instead of the back of the head, if I did a profile shape, it still works for this too. This is something that I am kind of pointing out to help make it less mystifying or kind of confusing or abstract. It sets up the body perfectly, really from whatever angle you want to draw. And the other benefit of knowing that is that you don't need to show a different configuration of lines to describe a unique angle, right? It always works. It's just how you proceed with, context in many cases that will, sell it for that specific pose that you want to get. And then some arms. So for a gesture on that one, that's what I'd be looking to do. Even in twisting poses, this works. I mean, if we're doing drapery, I would build up the whole figure. It's really the same as anatomy. So all the steps and things that we're talking about with muscle shapes, drapery is the same in terms of technique or in terms of the development and the process of development. What changes is that it's not nearly as involved a subject as, understanding the muscles are. But I do need the skeleton, right? So I can't really get a good sense of what the drapery is doing without the landmarks. So that's what we're doing here. This one I feel like is twisting. Looks like the chest goes this way and the pelvis turns back and in. I'm going to set up some boxes just so I know which way the forms are going. And then just like with the muscles, I want my drapery to go around, wrap around these objects. So here's my box. And then I would want the same thing for cylinders. The only thing I change when I lecture on drapery is the terminology. So like instead of landmarks being the skeleton as a way to realize where muscles might connect, now your landmarks are you're just a big wire hanger. That's their operation. So they catch clothing or drapery in areas that are flatter or more rigid, like this, and cause for different configurations of pattern, primarily C and S curves, which still mean the same thing in drapery, pinches and stretches, based on the proximity of landmarks, if they're closer together or further. The only thing that's more manifestly clear in drapery that isn't as clear in anatomy is gravity. And it is clear, right? Gravity is a big part of figures and weight and movement and muscles. But there's nothing, unless we're looking at hair or maybe subcutaneous body fat, that has the same noticeable kind of gesture that most drapery does, right? Because if I'm looking at clothing on a wire hanger, it's going to adopt whatever that structure is until it leaves. And when it leaves, it immediately has a relationship consistent with that of gravity. So that's something that I think is a little bit different or just a little varied, that isn't a complete one-to-one with how we've addressed muscles. Okay, so that's probably good. Let's turn the opacity down on that one so that we could look at some of the folds over. So when I look at drapery, I only see, by way of practice and striving for economy, just 6 folds. So those folds are pipe fold, diaper fold, so I'll just write them down. Pinch fold, there's a fold that creates a twist, there's a fold that creates a compression, so I call a Z, and then there's a fold that is representative of movement, so flag fold. The only thing I avoid is anything that is inert, so drapery that doesn't have something to say about form, or qualities that are inner, like wrinkles, or something that is like detail oriented that doesn't showcase the underlying story of the figure. So if we look at some of the ones on her, so this is basically our principle of fabric clinging or more taut in its structure and linear appearance on areas that there is clearly a present bone and that's being held. This from this shoulder to this eventual shoulder over here, this is a diaper fold. So a diaper fold is any point where there's two tension points. So you always get a big U and then an expanse of drapery, and then sometimes excess on the sides. So think of this just like anatomy, where you could move these points further or closer, and so it can pinch or stretch that shape. Like for example, this one is static, but this shoulder is lifting, so it's moved this tension point in. It's also now rolling around her deltoid, which is why it adopts this movement. So that goes up and over. The basic design is a diaper fold, and then it goes. If you like character and you like drapery, one thing I always recommend is that you break down the drapery of characters that you like, but start from their archetype. And I have a YouTube video on this if anybody wants to watch it, where I break down the clown, the new one, because he has such an interesting shapes in the costume, because it's that really interesting mix of things that are friendly to give it like the clown feel, plus really graphic, disturbing gestured triangles that feel predatory. I always start with a shape language, or what's called a form language for characters. How do the basic silhouettes, or how can we break the basic silhouette down to archetype shapes? No more usually than 2 as a combination. This one just has kind of like the classic heroine archetype, which would just be the clothing used to define something that is more traditionally feminine in storytelling. Of course, there's a little difference or variation, but if we were to kind of cover it all with one dark value, it would be something like that. So we work down. So now we have the belt, and now it's a tension point. It's just not a skeleton. So tension points in drapery can be the skeletal landmarks, like they were at the shoulders, or something artificial like this, like the shirt tucked in, or a belt, or causes for fabric to behave differently. Because of this, though, we get another quality of drapery, which are pipe folds. And pipe folds are like, think of your shower curtain or maybe window coverings, like how you get those consistent points that hang fabric, and then when they all fall, it looks like there's a series of pipes or cylinders kind of stacked next to one another. So that's what I'm seeing here, and you can tell by, if we just kind of imagine that whatever this is kind of looks like a sword isn't there, you start to get these lines, and those would be little pipe folds, but that's all in response to the compression of that rope, and these all move with the gesture, right? So that's why it's important that rib cage is in there. This pulls up, this starts to pull over with like the lean of the body. There's also pipe folds made on the push of the breast here too, so you can kind of see these lines. It's just the way that it's pushing or suspending fabric. And then also here, where it kind of pulls over with this lashing to the arm. So I get another diaper fold here, and then this is another pipe fold that pulls back into that belt. And then this is just kind of like torn fabric. That I would just throw in for texture, the sake of texture. This is also pulling over that way, then comes back down behind. And then we have the fabric kind of leaving the belt and now pushing up and over the hip. And this isn't a specific fold. But then if we look here, so I have tension point of the dagger, whatever that thing is, and then another little pinch from the belt. And then we're creating this is another diaper fold where there's some excess between those points. So it starts to kind of make this shape, which you can also see in some of the tone. And then from there, it becomes pipe folds again. So what happens is it runs down, it kind of graces the knee, flares out, and then this is just like your shower curtain down here. The cool thing about pipe folds is it's always out and then in and then out, so there's an asymmetry to it, but that's why you get the offset light and dark. So get light, dark, just like you see light, shadow, and those will come up. So this kind of specifically comes off the knee or near the knee, so that's getting darker, and then it comes back out, and then that's falling from this thigh, so like that. But my other rule in drapery is I only use 2 to 3 lines per fold. So on my first pass especially, it's the way that I keep myself from going over investing. So 2 or 3 lines per area. So like I described the pipe folds here, 2 lines. I made the pipe folds off the belt, 3 lines, 2 lines for diaper fold. Doesn't mean you can't go back in and work with it a little bit more, but my experience is that everybody with Drapery immediately switches into render mode and then shows me everything I don't want to see. The imperfections and the wrinkles, and that stuff is fine if there's a reason. Like maybe you have a character that is of a lower class in a, different or future world, and you want to show that they, aren't well kept, or something like that. Then maybe there's a story reason. It doesn't show me much, doesn't show story, doesn't predict and give the movement of the figure much of a realization. In fact, it impedes it. Yeah, but that's mostly it. So for this one, we only needed 2 of our 3 folds, right? So it's a pretty good summary in terms of the folds, because you almost never really have to go through too many. And if there is, and there's a fold maybe you don't recognize, more often than not, it's just that these two can sometimes get together and create unholy bastard fold children that are like, the folds combining. And that just takes a little bit of kind of discerning or working through, but it's pretty easy otherwise. Okay.
So for Michael, check out his Introduction to Figure Construction and Head Construction courses on Proko.com. Both courses have hours of demonstrations, lectures, and student critiques. If you're interested, click on the links in the description. Thanks.